Welcome to the Jewish Drinking Show, where we explore drinking and Jewish wisdom, history, practices, and more in the pursuit of healthy, mindful, and yes, joy-filled approaches to drinking and Jewish life. Welcome, everybody, to the 97th episode of the Jewish Drinking Show. I'm your host, Rabbi Drew Kaplan, and I'm very excited to welcome first-time guest to the show, Brad du Plessis.
Thank you so much for having me, Rabbi Drew. Very excited to be here and very excited to talk about my favorite subject. Talk wine.
Awesome. Very, very great. So you know wine, but people might not know you. So for those less familiar with Brad here, he has been the lead wine consultant for kosherwine.com, the largest kosher wine retailer in the US. And actually, before we go anywhere, I just want to, if anybody actually goes and visits kosherwine.com, you can see his name and visage on the top of the page. So he's right there. So he's not just, it doesn't say that just to be like, oh, there's some Brad, as if it's, a Brad in India. He really exists, and this is that Brad. So,
and if you click on that, you actually speak to me.
It like calls you? Oh, it's
yeah, it's like an email, a chat. You speak to me or someone on the team, but right. You might speak to me.
You're a real person. So anybody who thinks that it just says that on Kosher Wine, you are really the person. It's not a robot or something hiding behind. Okay. He's been doing that. It's the largest wine retailer in the US, kosher wine retailer in the US. He got his start in the wine industry as a cellar rat at one of Napa Valley's most prestigious wineries. Although an amazing educational experience, Brad learned that wine production was not where he saw his future. He did, however, find a home in the winery tasting room, eventually working his way up to hospitality manager. This led to working on the wholesale side of the business, selling to the best restaurants and wine shops on the East Coast. And not included in this bio, although I found this deeply fascinating, is the whole your entry into the whole wine business was through Gary Vaynerchuk, right?
That is correct. Yeah.
Do you mind sharing that brief Gary V story?
Sure. Yeah.
I just have to share to listeners, Gary V was one of my major inspirations for starting Jewish Drinking and the podcast. So that's the Gary V connection here.
Gary V is like a fascinating character who is now like this social media mogul, but before all of that, he was a wine retailer, and he had this podcast. It was kind of one of the original video podcasts called Wine Library TV. And a friend, I was into wine. Wine was always part of my life. Growing up Jewish, you always have a little bit of wine at the table at least once a week, right? So wine was like always kind of in my life. My dad grew up with wine a lot, so wine was kind of important to me, but then in college, I really got into wine, and I realized how geeky you can get about wine. And I'm like such a geek. It was like Star Wars or wine, and I still pick Star Wars, but
in the right place.
But I could geek out in the same way, right? So I really got into wine, and then at work one day I was working for Apple. Once again, I was a geek. A buddy of mine said, "Have you ever heard of Gary Vaynerchuk?" So I got into Wine Library TV. I became what we call a Vaniac, right? Got really, really into wine, learned so much from him, just such an engaging character. And then one day I found out he was coming to Houston. I was planning to move to Napa. So I was like, I need to get in touch with this guy. Like, I'm going to get into the wine business. I'm moving to Napa. He's got all the contacts in the world. So we met up at a bar. He bought us bottles of wine. I was like starstruck. But my wife eventually said, Gary, the reason my husband asked you to meet is because he needs a job in Napa. And without flinching, Gary said, I'm going to hook you up. Wow. He just put me in touch with like 20 people. One of them said yes. And that was my foray into the wine business. That was 13 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's a different era for Gary V.
Oh, yeah.
Wow, that's really awesome. Okay. So wine, and more wine. What are you drinking this evening, Brad?
Oh, I've got one of my favorite producers, Shiran. It's a tiny little, lights a bit bad there. Okay. Tiny little producer out of Israel. He's based in Efrat, like literally making wine out of his garage sort of thing. And just he makes a bunch of really cool blends. I'm drinking the Trio, which is a cool blend of Carignan, Petit Syrah, and Syrah. One of my favorites, and I'm enjoying it thoroughly. You got anything in your glass?
I do. I'm drinking nothing as exotic or special, but I'm drinking Barcan Classic 2019 Merlot. So that's what I've got. It does the job.
It does. All right, well, a classic. L'chaim.
It is classic. Yeah, I got started. I already maybe a glass or and a half in, but yes, I'm ahead of you.
That's perfectly fine.
Running start.
I'll catch up.
Yes. All right. So it's interesting. I imagine that working for kosherwine.com, and it sounds like over a dozen years experience in the wine industry. So you probably had a wide breadth of experiences of tasting certainly wineries and varietals and so forth. Which brings us to our topic, which is, although hopefully we'll get at some point to what you do at kosherwines.com and how you help customers pick out wines, which I imagine there's a huge educational component to that.
Absolutely.
Which I definitely want to get into later. Don't let me forget. But the main topic of our conversation for this episode is helpful advice for people selecting wines for the Passover Seder. I mean, that's a pretty, I think even for people who might not know that much about wine and Jewish ritual practice, Passover Seder, I think it's a cornerstone of Jewish practices. And yet I don't know how much people really think about selecting wines for the Seder. Right?
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I think that, and no knocking on this, but like Manischewitz is a mainstay on the Seder table.
Yeah.
I would say probably for that reason, because people don't want to put too much thought into it in that, like, oh, no, we get Manischewitz, we put it on the table.
Yeah.
I think that there's so much opportunity for, you've got four chances to, try something unique, minimum. So like, I think there's so much opportunity out there to try different things, try unique things, have a variety of options out on the table for your friends and family. Pesach has always been my favorite holiday. Like growing up, it was always my favorite, mostly because of the chopped liver, which didn't get made very often. But that one time a year, I had access to chopped liver. But I was always, even as a kid, like I didn't get to drink a lot of the wine, but I would always taste a little bit of the different things on the table. And there was never really anything that good on the table. I don't remember specifically, but it probably wasn't that good. But it's such a great opportunity to try different things and try new things. And I'd love to talk to people about some great options that might be available to them.
Is the pre-Passover season a heavy time of questions, or is it pretty uniform throughout, or is there a spike in the month or so leading up to Passover?
It's by far our busiest time of year.
Oh,
yeah. Okay. By far, it's our, like, I would say that quarter is. I mean, I don't know what the specific numbers are, but yes, we're busy. We're all working very, very hard for post Pesach. Pretty much post Pesach, it picks up and never lets go.
You're saying after Passover it slows down.
After Passover, it slows down pretty significantly.
How busy is it before Purim?
So
or does it pick up after Purim, or does it already start before Purim?
So it starts before Purim. It definitely peaks up, and it's a lot of like smaller format bottles, people interested in Mishloach Manot, things like that. But then I think Purim comes around and people are like, wait, it's Purim? That means Pesach is right around the corner. And then everyone kind of thinks, okay, I need to start buying some wine. And then, it doesn't let up till Pesach. And then obviously we have peaks before Rosh Hashanah and other Chagim, Chanukah, Thanksgiving, things like that. But Pesach is a different ball game for us.
All right. So with all that teasing out of the way, so what are some key considerations for consumers when it comes to choosing wines for the Seder? And do you also advocate different wines for, let's say, a cup at a Seder, like for the 4 cups versus in the meal?
So I like to have, okay, so let me answer both those questions.
Yes.
I think
and
that
you know what? Because that's not enough questions. Also, do you advocate?
I'm not going to remember any of these. Sorry.
Right. With different wines as you progress. Like it might be certain types of wine to maybe kick things off, or as you're going on versus post meal. I don't know. So that's a plenty.
So I think that I personally, I personally believe that with all the glasses available to you, all the cups available, like I call them glasses just because I'm used to having wine in a glass, but the terminology I guess is a cup. But with those 4 cups available to us, there's a lot of opportunity to try different things. I like to have utilitarian wines that kind of can cross over into the meal. So you can either however you want to celebrate your Seder. Some people might want to keep some in their glass and then move through it with their meal. They don't want to necessarily have something new during the meal. So I like to kind of plan the cups out, lining up with wines that are appropriate for, the meal times of the meal of the Seder. So that's kind of my thought process when it comes to it. And for that reason, I like to space things out with my 4 cups. So like the first cup, I always see as how I want to start every meal of my life. And that is with a glass of sparkling wine. Sparkling wine to me is just so celebratory. It's delicious, right? A lot of people underestimate how delicious sparkling wine is. But like if I could only drink one category of wine for the rest of my life, it would be sparkling wine. So I'm a big advocate of starting that first cup sparkling wine. Now
it's also fairly light. It's almost like an appetizer of sorts.
That's how I see it. Most you go to like a fancy dinner party, and like the cocktail hour is always some sparkling wine or a sparkling wine cocktail being passed around, because it's like an aperitif, right? Is what they call it in Europe. So aperitif, I guess, is what the French call it. That's always a good start for the meal to me. Now, in the spectrum of sparkling wine, there is everything from super entry level to the champagne of wines, right? Champagne, it was a joke. So like, and in the kosher wine world, we have that full spectrum, and we have a lot of kind of unique and interesting sweet sparkling wines too, which I don't shy away from. I'm kind of, I've always been a fan of stuff with a little bit of sugar to it. I mean, obviously, Blue Bottle Bartonero Moscato is such a huge hit. Always a good option. Or you can try something new. I mean, more recent vintages of the Bartonero Moscato are now Moscato d'Asti, which is a significant step up in quality. So if you haven't had it in a while, revisit it. It's kind of unique. It's good. It has a little bit more written on the label. But
wait, so initially when you were saying sparkling, I was actually thinking the sweeter stuff, but you meant even dry stuff like a champagne.
In my head, it's so funny how we are complete opposites on that.
Okay.
In my mind, I'm always at dry wine. The
like
sweet wine
like
is
a champagne or a prosecco, something in that.
Yeah. So obviously, if in a perfect world where bank accounts aren't an issue, champagne is the best sparkling wine that money can buy. It's a special experience. I mean, in the kosher wine world, we are very lucky to actually have access to some really, really special champagnes out there. Laurent Perrier has always been one of my favorite champagnes. The Laurent Perrier Rosé, it is very, very premium, I will say. But it might be one of the best bottles of wine I have ever had. Sparkling, whatever. Laurent Perrier Rosé is probably my top 10 favorite wines ever. And if the budget allows, I will always get that bottle of wine. Now, it usually doesn't, and there are lots of other options out there, right? Champagne is very unique because you're making it in the champagne method, which was made in Champagne, and you're not really making a wine. You're making a bottle of wine, right? Because you are making a still wine, then you're re-fermenting it in a bottle. So you actually add more yeast in, you add a bit more sugar in, and it ferments in the bottle. You have secondary fermentation in the bottle. Then you have to get that yeast out of there. It goes through a whole nother process, which can take a whole much longer. I won't get that into it, but you pay a premium for the champagne or traditional method. You can get some more affordable traditional method wines. You can get a cava, for example. Freixenet makes a great cava that's available in the kosher market. And then the kind of price point below that, you can get some great sparkling wines like Prosecco or, some Israeli sparklers. So there's lots of sparkling wine options, but that's in the dry world. In the sweet world, we spoke about already. Lots of good options.
Bartonero Moscato d'Ace, I think that's a very solid and certainly familiar wine for people.
I mean, there's other Moscatos out there. There's other unique sparkling wines available, but if the budget allows champagne, always champagne. If not, there are other options out there.
I've never thought about champagne as one of the 4 cups, but that's very clever. All right, that's what we're here for.
We've even got. We're lucky enough to import a small producer called Paul Briard. And they make quite affordable champagne.
Oh wow!
So lots, and there's Mavushal options. There's lots of good champagne out there.
I hope you've been enjoying this episode so far. I wanted to break in, give you a sneak peek into next week's episode featuring Professor Mark Michael Epstein on medieval Haggadah art.
Also, it's possible that this book was made, as many illustrated books were, for a woman, right? And so it picks her and not the husband as holding the cup of wine. And that says something about status and patronage.
Hope you enjoy that sneak peek into next week's episode. Now back into this week's episode.
Then I like to move into kind of that next. I just see the progression as a meal, right? What would you have after the aperitif? You would probably move into like a white wine, right? So I always do that second cup as a nice white wine. Now, this isn't a place where you have to break the bank. There are so many good options available to us for high quality white wine at a good price point. Look, if you're paying a bit more of a premium price point, you're going to find extremely high quality. But there's a bunch of stuff out there that's extremely well priced, $20 or below, that you can really access. A good bottle of wine.
Wonderful.
Yeah, there are some Sauvignon Blanc blends. There is a Yafo. Yafo makes a white wine. I think it's $20 out of Israel. Delicious bottle of white wine. Tir makes an entry level for $25. Your Tir white, it's Sauvignon Blanc. Great bottle of wine. We can step up to some Chardonnays. If you want to. Look, it's Pesach. It only comes around once a year. You got 2 shots at it. I always advocate to spend a little bit of money on the wine, right? Save, if you want to save money on the sparkler, move on to the white wine and maybe spend a little bit more money, right? So in the $30 range, there's a bunch of, not a bunch, but there's some Chablis available. There's some other white Burgundies. There's a Mercure from Chateau de Santenay, which is like $30, $35, something like that. But a great bottle of wine for the price point. So from one of the greatest regions in the world to produce white wine. It's Chardonnay. If you're looking for a Chardonnay that's unique, special, explore the wines of Burgundy, very, very special region. So that's kind of where I go on that second glass of wine.
Hey there, I wanted to see how you're enjoying the episode so far. If you have any feedback, comments, questions, anything, please let me know. And also, if you have topics as well as potential guests, including, who knows, maybe yourself, please let me know. Feel free to reach out to me at drew@jewishdrinking.com. Thank you, and now back into the show.
What would you do for the meal? Would you do wines for the meal that are different from what you would do sort of for the statutory 4 cups?
So, I mean, whenever there's an opportunity to try something new and different, I'm always up for that. I personally like, just talking about me, I like lighter bodied, easier drinking red wines.
So no heavy cream lagas, no manchettas.
Yeah, none of that stuff. I'm leaning more towards, you brought it up before the show, like a Pinot Noir. There's some really great affordable Pinot Noir. The Barcon Classic Pinot, a great bottle of wine. We've got a great French Pinot Noir of like sub $20 called the Groom d'Or. Great bottle of Pinot Noir. There's some great Gamay, which is another light-bodied red wine that people don't know so much about. Also from the Burgundy region. So Burgundy is the home of Pinot Noir. The southern part of Burgundy is a region called Beaujolais. Have you ever heard of Beaujolais Nouveau? Maybe. Anyway, Beaujolais is like the southern tip of Burgundy, and they grow red grape called Gamay. And Gamay is light-bodied, makes a fresh, bright, clean, crisp, delicious wine. And we have a few examples of that. So there's kind of a few better towns and regions that make better quality Gamay. There's entry level, all very well priced. So I like to explore those kind of lighter bodied wines with the meal, because we're only like halfway through the Seder, right? When you get to the meal. So I don't want to go too hard into the paint on the meal wines.
Oh yeah, it's that time of year. Passover is just around the corner. It's on its way. It's time to get rid of your chametz, or sell it if you prefer. And I've got resources for you at jewishdrinking.com/Passover. And of course, if you have any suggestions, ideas for anything that's not in there and you would like to see, please email me at drew@jewishdrinking.com. I'd love to hear from you how I can make more robust resources for you for Passover. All right, back into the show.
Meal finishes. We have our third cup. What do you advocate for that?
So now this is where I'm like, full court press. Like,
and also, I mean, belly full. So there's a lot to absorb the wine.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. So that's the other thing, right? Like, I don't mind like feeling the effects of wine. It's not my primary reason for drinking wine. I really get enjoyment out of discovering flavors and expressions and things like that. But like over a long Seder, and growing up, my Seders were pretty long. I certainly don't want to like be exhausted and lightheaded and stuff by the end of it, right? So I would prefer to not feel the effects of the wine by the end of the Seder. And for that reason, post meal, like you said, you've got some food in you now. There's some opportunity to maybe up the alcohol level, up the volume, right? The body of the wine. And when I talk about body, I feel like people talk about body, but they don't necessarily know what that means. And this is my kind of educator piece coming out. But
sure.
If you ever hear the word body, think of it like the feeling in your mouth that different kinds of milk give you. So skim milk, 1%, 2% whole milk, right? That's light to full bodied. So when people are talking about body, let's do it now. Let's do it together. You just poured yourself a new glass.
Yes, I refilled. All right, so I have this, as I mentioned earlier, 2019 Merlot from Barcon. Classic.
Take a sip, swirl it around in your mouth. Let's touch all the edges and then swallow. And now I haven't got that wine. I have tasted it, but on a scale of skim milk to whole milk, what's the sort of viscosity of that wine in your mouth?
I would say in the mid-ish.
So lower. Like 1 to 2, right? I would say, and that's probably about where that wine is. Probably medium to medium, light. Bodied wine. But that's kind of a great way of when you read it on the back label or you hear people talking about the body, that's kind of a nice little way to kind of discern that for yourself, which I think is fun.
I will just add, I didn't even think about swishing all around my mouth before tasting. So it's fascinating for me. I even picked up on a little bit of tasting notes, but also the mouthfeel was even a little bit different than just regularly sipping it. So for me, that was fascinating. Just a different, I already went through a glass, but a different experience.
It's quite fascinating. There's also, when you're you always see this, right? Smell your wine, get your nose into the glass. So that's important. Don't get me wrong, super important. You're going to pick up a lot of those flavors. But what I do when I taste, and I don't do this at a table because it's kind of rude, but I'll take a sip, swallow, and then I'll actually suck some air through the wine to retronasally smell the wine, because you've got all these olfactory sensors at the back of your nose, and you can get to them that way. So kind of make that baby bird sound, and you will get a whole nother kind of wave of aromas, which is like an experience you haven't necessarily had before, right?
Yeah.
Like you're not smelling from the back of your nose, but there's a whole nother
layer of experience.
Yeah. Wow. Fascinating, right? It's Very. I mean, I do all these things kind of just by second nature right now, and I interact with so many wine professionals that's just a normal thing, and it's fun to kind of share that and think about the first time I experienced that.
Yeah, and it's also interesting. I mean, I also experienced. I mentioned a whole other layer of experiences. I got a little bit, almost more dryness out of it. Out of
what you're doing when you're swirling the wine around in your mouth, it's hitting every surface, and that mouthfeel is definitely going to be affected because you're exposing your the different surfaces of your mouth to the tannins that are present in the wine, right? So tannins have these active sites that will bind to the proteins in your mouth. If you're just swallowing and the wine's just staying on your tongue, going straight down your throat, the tannins aren't actually getting access to those other spots in your mouth. That's why when you swirl it, you get a little bit more of that kind of velvety, mouth drying tannin effect.
I'm very curious to now try this with other, I'm used to beer tasting. I'm not used to doing, so I'm obviously, I think with whiskey, it's very common. People swoosh it all around, but that's okay.
Yeah,
I'll have to experiment.
You can't. It is very difficult to like if you're doing any academic sort of wine tasting. If you're getting a certification through a sommelier or my certification is through the WSET, which is the Wine and Spirits Education Trust. It's a London-based organization. Anyway, they part of their examinations at certain levels are include a blind tasting portion where you have to taste a wine, systematically analyze the wine, write down your report, and then it gets graded. And I mean, there is no way you would ever pass an exam like that unless you are swirling and sucking and making horrible noises that would make you very bad dinner guest.
Right.
Okay, so moving along to that the third. The third cup. Like I said, like this is where I go deep into the paint, up the volume, up the alcohol. I like bigger, bolder red wines in that case. This would be a good example, right? The Shiraz 2018 Trio, which is a lovely blend of, like I said, Carignan, Petit Syrah, and Syrah. So bigger, bolder, fruit-forward, higher alcohol. Alcohol on this wine is, I don't know, 14%, which is pretty high, pretty standard for an Israeli red, but higher than any of those other wines we were talking about.
The earlier wines would be what, in the 10 to 12% ABV range?
Like 11 to 13. Okay. Like if you're drinking some California whites can be even higher, but the ones that I specifically mentioned, like 11 to 13.
So I'm curious about that little throwaway comment. What makes California whites a higher ABV than typical whites?
Or than other whites, right? It's mostly to do with the sunshine, right? You can't hide the sunshine in California. If you compare,
that boosts the sugars.
So it does. These wines get higher sugar content. They get riper at higher sugar content. So they generally, New World wines or California domestic wines will generally be higher alcohol, more fruit forward, and lower acid. So if you had a Chardonnay from California, it would generally be that, versus from Burgundy, France, for example, lower alcohol, less fruit forward, higher acid. Because as a grape ripens, the sugar picks up and the alcohol drops off. And at some point they kind of cross, and there's an optimum Brix or sugar level that you want to harvest the grape at. In California, generally that sits to a point where the acid is lower. In France, generally that sits to a point where the acidity is higher.
Hey there, I hope you're enjoying this episode so far. I want to break in again, and if you have ideas beyond the show, beyond the podcast, beyond this video content, if you have ideas for what Jewish drinking can bring you, whether it's, who knows, maybe it's Zoom sessions, maybe it's events, maybe, who knows, swag, please let me know. I'm very curious to hear from you any ideas, things that we can do, things that I can bring you from Jewish drinking. So feel free to reach out to me at drew@jewishdrinking.com. I'm happy to bring that to you. All right, now back into the show.
So that's the third glass, and the fourth. Would you just really just go for just a bigger, bolder?
So I honestly, there's no real dessert of at the Seder. The Afikoman is the worst dessert ever. So
use the wine as the dessert, right? There we go. It's the answer. Wine is the answer.
in my life, wine is the answer to most things. So yeah, I like what I call a dessert in a glass. I like a beautiful dessert wine. Now, dessert wines are not for everyone. Right, they are
because they're usually pretty sweet.
They're very often very sweet. My favorites are very high alcohol, and you treat them very differently. Right, these aren't you aren't going to pour yourself 6 ounces of it. Right, so there's also depending on how much
some of our listeners might.
There we go. That's fine too. There's also, depending on, I guess halachically, there might be a certain amount you have to drink.
It's like 3.5 ounces, but are they? So they're typically sweeter. So I guess they could give you more of a, more of a hangover. I guess, is there a reason?
Look. At this point, in our hypothetical Seder that you and I are having together, we're already 6 deep, right? So we're in it to win it.
I'm excited for this. I'm we should just do this now.
We have a mock Seder live. So I think I'm in. Great. So yeah, 3 ounces, 3.5 ounces is probably pushing it where I would want to be on something like a port style wine, which is actually.
I thought you were going to say a recliner. But port style wine. Okay, good.
So where there's extra alcohol added, it's fortified, so it bumps up the alcohol level. We've got a great port style wine from Netofa in Israel. They make a ruby port, well priced. Has really kind of berry, fruit forward flavors, and that little kick of alcohol just to kind of act as we started with an aperitif. We're now having a digestif, right? So kind of help all of that settle.
For people who might not, it's interesting. I don't know how, especially kosher consumers, but maybe even people who are listening to this who do not keep strictly kosher and maybe don't, but for the Seder, they'll do kosher. Port wines, I have a lot of questions. I happened to be in Israel in the summer. I was able to pick up a bottle of port because I'm not used to seeing kosher port. So for me, it was just the novel. I haven't even opened it yet. For me, it was the novelty of it. I'm very excited. I might even, now that we're recording this, I might even save it for the Seder. But how widespread what's the availability of kosher port wines? How common is it to find them?
So it's not super common, and port is one of those classifications like champagne. It can only come from Portugal, right? Port can only be made in Portugal. Champagne can only be made in the Champagne region of France. So in Portugal, there is one production run of kosher port, and as soon as it gets made, it gets sold. We can't keep it in stock. I believe it's one of the big port houses that makes a kosher run. I saw someone mention that, and I don't want to say anything at risk of being wrong, but I think it's one of the big kind of old school English houses that make port in Portugal. So that is available in the market, and we do get it in Quevedo.
So there's not so many different kosher ports running around.
No, but there are a lot of port styles.
Right.
So
for
that's
the kosher
like
consumer, though.
Yes, for the kosher consumer.
Okay.
There are port style wines, meaning wines made in the style of port.
Okay.
Not in Portugal. Right?
Gotcha.
So Notofa in Israel makes a ruby. They make a late bottle vintage, an LBV, meaning that it gets aged and then put in a bottle. There are... I can't think of them. There are a few different. Adir, I think, makes a port. Psagot makes a wine called Prat. They get very kind of smart about how to describe it as a port without infringing on any kind of legal.
Letters.
Yeah.
Okay. That's clever. That's clever. That's a clever misspelling. Okay.
So there are port style wines available. There's also, I mean, if you want another style of dessert wine, which is one of my favorite in the world, is Sauterne, which is an extremely late harvest dessert wine made from botrytis grapes, which are grapes that have been affected by the noble rot. If you saw a picture of them, it would turn you off them, but they make some of the most delicious wines in the world. The wines kind of get all shriveled up and look kind of all... not very appetizing, but they make absolutely delicious wine, and that's from why? Because they are desiccated pretty much. There's hardly any water left in them, so you're getting
super sugary,
super high sugar, and the phenolics, the phenols, the flavor compounds in that grape are so much more concentrated because there's no water to dilute them.
Oh wow!
So you get like this burst of flavor explosion in your mouth when you taste them. Those Sauterne wines are very unique. They're very like caramelly and dried apricot and honey, and they only get better with age. These are wines that you could stick in your cellar and forget about for like 25 years. Wow. And really experience something special. And we actually...
So I'll have to admit publicly, I've never had one of those. So I'm very intrigued.
So Piada is a great producer that makes kosher Sauterne, and it is extremely, extremely special. Once again, these are wines that you can buy and forget about for years, but they do taste delicious young. Wow. We're very lucky to have access to a decent amount of Sauterne. And then there's Sauterne style wines made in other countries. Castel in Israel makes what they call the M, which is not actually made out of the same grapes as a Sauterne, but it's that Sauterne style. Very, very good bottle of wine. So lots of great dessert options available. There's late harvest. We're actually in the process right now, because of kosherwine.com's got this ability to really direct the market in a sense, right? Because we're such a large retailer. We're able to go to certain wineries and through the help of other amazing people in the wine world, make our own kosher production runs at these non-kosher wineries. So we're actually right now in the process of making an ice wine in New York State. Wow. And what they do is they harvest those kind of late harvest raisin shriveled up grapes after the first freeze.
Oh wow.
So it's actually fascinating. It is a 2022 vintage wine. Yeah. That was that if it was harvested last year would have been a 2021 vintage wine. Wow. So it's like we're harvesting in January in the northern hemisphere, which is kind of a unique situation. Normally, like the southern hemisphere wouldn't even be harvesting in January. It's a bit early. So kind of very excited for that to hit the market. It's going to be a delicious and unique bottle of wine that we don't really have another example of in the kosher wine world.
Wow, that's really neat. Yeah. So what does kosher wine, are people in America able, does it matter which states? Are people able to order in every state, or are there certain states that cannot order from kosherwine.com?
There's a handful of states that, just federal law or state laws don't allow for shipping to those states. It's a handful. The one major one that we're kind of struggling with right now. No, we can ship to Texas.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I said that because Gary V's wine, they can't ship to Texas. That's why.
Yeah. There's ways to do it. You won't get it the next day. It takes a little while to get to you, but we have many very happy customers in Texas.
Awesome.
Yeah, just a handful of states that you can't, Utah and actually we can do Kentucky now, Alabama. Just a few states that there's actual laws that it's an issue.
Right.
But generally, most states and most of where our customer base would live, we have access to, which is great.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
So going back to what I was at, so if people were to click on Contact Brad, our kosher wine consultant at kosherwine.com. So what do you typically encounter as far as questions that consumers might have? And I imagine some questions occur more frequently, right?
Yeah, so definitely. And there's, a lot of, where's my wine, right? I ordered it, can you help me track it? But the more exciting questions that I like to handle are I'm having a dinner, I'm hosting a Sheva Brachos, right? This is the menu. What wines should I have? Or I'm having a wedding. I want to have some nice wines at the wedding. I'm never happy with the Mevushal options available. I love that. I love that challenge of getting people excited about entry level Mevushal wine, because there are great options out there. That sort of stuff gets me excited. And then there's a lot of which of these two wines in my cart do you prefer? How does this vintage vary from another vintage? Kind of a lot of detailed questions that is pretty amazing, and it really speaks to the interest that our consumers and wine lovers have in the wine, and the detail of those questions is quite amazing. I find it and I wanted to talk to you about this, but as you guys can tell, I love educating people about wine, especially, and I geek out and I get really into it. So when I first started at kosherwine.com, I wanted to launch an education. It started off actually as an internal education program to educate the staff at kosherwine.com. But they loved the outline, and they were like, no, let's do this for the consumer. So we expanded it to consumers. We do it's a pretty cool program. We ship a case of wine, and then we open 2 bottles of wine every week together for 6 weeks, and we learn a different topic. But in those classes, we've already had 2 full cohorts of those Wine 101 classes. And we do it once a year every summer. So, if you're interested, go to kosherwine.com and take a look at it. But in those classes, the amazingly insightful questions I get are just so fascinating to me. People everything from when I'm at a restaurant and the waiter pours me that little bit of wine, what am I supposed to do? Right? Which, if you care to know, you're supposed to smell it, see if there's any faults, and then give a nod or say, no, that's great. And then they'll pour it for the rest of the table.
Oh, wow.
But from that to how to open a bottle of wine to how to read a label, there is so much out there that is so natural to me, and it's just being a 13-year veteran of the wine industry. It is basic to me. It's not basic in simple, but basic in
how you operate,
a given, right?
Yeah.
And I realized that that's where my passion lies, in sharing those insights and those basic things in my world and sharing them with the greater consumer, just to up that level of knowledge and that ability to discover what they enjoy and what they like about wines for themselves, right? Which they'll never do if you're not swirling the wine around in your mouth, right?
Yep, for sure.
So all of that, but hopefully without the pretense that is so easily and such a fine line that can be easily crossed in the wine world. I try and kind of stay away from that as much as possible and just show the uniqueness and the special kind of world that is my business, but also my passion. So yeah, so that education piece has just been so exciting and fascinating to me, and I've really truly found my kind of calling, I think.
That's really wonderful. I was going to say not necessarily anti-pretentiousness, but at least avoiding of pretense sounds very coming full circle, Gary V-esque. That Gary Vaynerchuk in wine library stuff, he wanted to make it more accessible. That wine didn't have to be just for the elites or pretentious. That anybody can enjoy wine.
100%. And I think like there's something that really epitomizes that.
Brad, this was very helpful. Thank you so much. And with that, I think it's time to say l'chaim.
L'chaim. Thanks, Roger.
Absolutely.